Japan by River Cruise is made possible thanks to your donations at japanbyrivercruise.com, our paid subscribers, and the generosity of our corporate sponsors. Corporate sponsors, paid subscribers, and you, all people who are upset about the lack of content over this last half a year, and also the volume and energy with which I started this podcast.
Yeah, what a great thing to do, that we've managed to solve one problem by giving people content they're asking for, and then created a new one by not giving them the content that they want.
Hello, Brian, and welcome back to Japan by River Cruise. I'm Bobby Judo.
I remember that guy, and I'm Ollie Horn. Remember me? I'm the British one.
When you said I remember that guy, were you talking about me or Brian?
Me. Do you reckon it's been so long that our in-jokes have started to be forgotten?
Oh, of course. What
would have been nice is if we take a break so long that we return back to the problem that we faced when we launched the podcast, which is people with an earnest interest in Japanese river cruises wondering when the podcast starts.
That's not a problem, Ollie. That's a dream come true. So we hope that you are having a great time wherever and whenever you are listening. We've been away for quite a bit. We are looking forward to trying to get back to a somewhat regular schedule and cruise some new waters and bring you reports on those in the new year. We hope that you will continue to join us.
Yes, we hope that you continue to join us. A very loose translation of Korekara mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu, which is a euphemism for please stick with it, boys. Boys, of course, pronounced with the U. That's not gender specific. That's a nautical term. Thank you sincerely for all of your support this year. I mean, weirdly, Bobby, we have actually put out loads of episodes. We just haven't put out nearly as many episodes as when we were frankly obsessing over this show.
I'm gonna need to see the figures on that.
Yeah, well, look, it definitely wasn't 2020 levels when we put out an episode a week, which is absolutely mad. But especially with guests as well, because they take so long to schedule. Anyway, I mean, what's nice is that we can blame Jake Adelstein. I mean, that's the nicest thing about this, that I think we basically lost momentum the moment when we tried to schedule an episode with him. That didn't happen. Then it took like 4 weeks to reschedule. All, of course, our own fault, but it's nice that he was involved so we can externalize some of the blame. Anyway.
I don't know what you're talking about or why we would want to blame Jake Adelstein. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy who just gave me a paid spot on his podcast, The Evaporated, available now wherever podcasts are available.
Oh, now I get it.
He's a great guy. I've always been. I'm pro Jake. Go Jake.
Oh, really? Okay. We need to find a new podcast enemy. Anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying thanks for sticking with us. As I've alluded to on the podcast before, I had to take a little break while I sorted some stuff out, and that is a euphemism. And obviously, Bobby had to take a bit of time off to launch his restaurant, which thankfully is launched and looks great, and I can't wait to visit it. But anyway, this is before we dive straight in, for the regular listeners, thank you. If you're new to this podcast, this is a mad way to start. You're probably not listening anymore. Bobby, let's continue with the intro.
Cool. We're doing a special 2-part end-of-the-year holiday episode. We will be doing our official rundown of all of the hottest Japanese river cruise news that came out in 2022. Part 1, which you're listening to right now, will be from January through June, and Part 2 will maybe happen.
That would be a real cruel thing to do, wouldn't it? To start this episode by going, look, we're sorry, we're going to try and get back on track, and then only dangle half a carrot. Also, I like the fact that we've gone with the fact that this is the official rundown. This is it. This is the authority. Future historians in 50 years' time, when they're looking back at 2022 in Japanese news, will go, we better start with Japan by River Cruise.
Yeah. Hey, if you can find another 2022 year-end roundup of Japanese river cruise news, listen to that.
Yeah, they might meet promises. Oh man, it's so good. Honestly, it's so nice to be back in this weird virtual recording studio. I think something that listeners might not appreciate is Bobby and I only ever see each other on a Zoom-like window. You know, well, when I used to live in Fukuoka, we would see each other all the time. You know, we'd be doing shows together, we'd be touring together. We'd
get together and cook.
Exactly. We were friends. Can you believe that? We had actual social engagements. And this podcast, as much as it's a great way for us to meet new people and bring you interesting guests and create something that we're proud of, it was also just a nice weekly and then monthly check-in. So the fact that it's been at least 6 weeks since we've seen each other's faces, I don't know, it gives me a nice little energy, gives me a nice little lease of life. And it's nice that I know that all the Bryans are joining us in this moment too. I don't know, it feels good.
You know, for me, not only was there that social aspect and that getting to meet guests aspect, but I think when we first started dedicating ourselves to covering Japanese river cruise news, I remember mentioning to you that like it was really helpful for me as a way to stay on top of what was going on in Japan, because it's
Right.
really easy to kind of check out, and especially during Corona, it was really easy to check out. And for my week-to-week TV work, I think like having a little bit of knowledge about what's going on in current events, what's going on in, you know, the headlines on the Japanese newspapers was a huge help in my work life, but also kind of made me really feel connected to what was happening. And when we stopped doing it, when I started researching to do this roundup, looking back through the stuff that happened this year, I was like, I don't remember any of this shit.
Yeah, well, that might just be long COVID. But no, yeah, I'm totally with you. And also, what's nice is that sometimes I think for me the best thing about this podcast is sometimes someone wants to talk to me about Japan, and there's normally some academic or journalist that we've had on the podcast that has said something really interesting, that's had like a really good angle on a particular story, and I can quote them, obviously not credit them, and pass off their smart ideas and smart analysis as my own.
Yeah, no, I mean you're absolutely right. Before the podcast, you just used to do that with your jokes.
That's right. Hang on a minute. Wait, hey. The tables turned this year. So for a long time, well, not for a long time, but for a good amount of time, if Bobby wrote a joke that I liked, I would very much consider that what's his is mine. That was the expression. But Bobby went and did a stand-up set in Tokyo with I've forgotten the name of the show. What's it called? Not Just a Diversity Hire. That's the show, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And you sent me the video to watch, which I really enjoyed. And what was nice is you did what I used to do, which is flag. Oh, by the way, about 15 minutes in, you might spot one of your jokes as like kind of a preemptive fire.
So I sent you the video of the same set that I did in Fukuoka. Actually, the video you saw was in Fukuoka.
Oh,
but
excuse me, that's right. Yeah, Ant Comedy Fukuoka.
It's just a little flair. It's just a little part. It's just an extra little joke to throw into a line that you used to do, which was you would say like, when you look like me, which I do, and then you'd go on with the sentence. And I think I said like when you're me, which I am. And when you just say it out like that, it's not a crack up joke, but when you're in a rhythm of joke after joke, and that's part of the build up to a next joke, and you're just coming off of a laugh, it's just such a incongruous thing to say that it catches people off guard.
Oh, exactly. So I used to tell this joke when I used to do a routine about going into a Japanese convenience store, because I used to explain to, don't forget, I was performing a show about Japan to mainly an audience of people that hadn't ever been to Japan. So I was explaining what the convenience store was, right? And, there's just so much that's not intuitive about a convenience store. So there's a lot of exposition and scene setting to do. And I would talk about how, your whole life in Japan revolves around there. You go there to pay bills, pick up parcels. But the problem that I faced in Japan was that every single store sells fried chicken. Now, that's so normalized to us because we've lived in Japan. But there's literally no other country in the world that sells actual hot, fresh. Go on.
That's how you know it's a Japan by River Cruise holiday special, because we're talking about fried chicken.
Actually, that hadn't even occurred to me. Very, very good. So now we can finally title this episode. Did you know that Christmas in Japan means KFC? So I'd explain how there'd be hot, fresh fried chicken, and I'd say not like some afterthought, like actual proper good fried chicken, like someone had built a fried chicken shop, then built a convenience store around it. And I'd say the issue was I'd walk into the shop and the clerk would assume I'm there for fried chicken. And that's when I'd say, when you live in Japan and you look like me, which I do. Anyway, it's just a nice aside. And it's nice that you reminded me of that, because I hadn't done that routine in years and years and years.
Yeah.
Nice throwback.
It works as a really good little like flagging line, and it's the first time ever that
Yeah,
I
it's
think
cute.
I've consciously been on stage and been like, this is an Ollie joke, and done it.
I think it only ever happened once that you were about to go on TV. You're about to do Asa Desu, and you text me to say, "Can I use one of your lines in Japanese?" That only ever happened once, I think. Obviously, if I could remember the line, I'd quote it.
Oh, speaking of TV lines, I got the biggest laugh I've ever gotten in a Japanese TV thing ever. Like, and I've gotten laughs, but like this just like straight up brought the house down, and it was in rehearsal. Do you know the
that's a shame.
Fukuoka? Yeah, the Fukuoka strawberries Amao. They have a strawberry brand called Amao, which is the famous brand of strawberries in Fukuoka.
Do you know? I
And
did not know that. If
It's
that were a pub quiz question, I would lose.
it's one of those a, I, U, E, O sakubuns where each letter, each character of the word stands for something. So o, u, which is akakute red, marukute round, okikute big, umai delicious. That's where they got the name Amao for, and it's kind of like Fukuoka, pub quiz trivia knowledge. And they asked me if I knew what it stood for, and I said, yeah, of course I know what it stands for. And they said, what? And I said, Ammari ni mo majime dato jinsei ga omoshiroku nai to oshiete kureta udon yasan. Which is, if you take things too seriously, life is no fun, is what I learned at the udon yasan. And like everybody
Did you just
it was just
improvise
so,
that?
Yeah. It was just like,
that's
how do
funny.
I keep this going? And it was easy because Ammari starts already, like that's already the ma, but then I just kind of like was
Yeah.
like, okay, what would connect? But yeah, it's really funny, and it was just such a shame that it was just in rehearsal.
Yeah, because I mean that's the kind of thing which you absolutely cannot deliver a second time.
Yeah, no. Which does not stop me from trying to relive it every chance I get.
Right. And did you manage to put it in the broadcast?
No, I used a different version of it somewhere else, but it wasn't as funny as the second time.
Right.
That's the first
this
time.
might
Yeah.
be interesting to the listeners. Actually, lots of people that listen to this podcast do creative things. But this idea of like recreating the first time you've done something, like we try really hard to not re-record bits of the show. Right? Obviously, if we think of something funny afterwards, we'll re-edit it in or something. But I have a story which happened to me last week, which reminded me of exactly this phenomenon, that I was doing a 1 hour work in progress preview of what I hope is going to be my new touring show. And just before that show, I was offered a 10-minute spot at a little comedy club. And I was like, great, I will practice one of the routines. So one of the routines which I was going to do in the hour show, I thought I'll practice in this 10-minute spot. And it was the story, which you know this story. I don't think I've ever told it on the podcast, but this was before we ever did Japan by River Cruise. I did a show called Pig in Japan, which I did in San Francisco. Someone from actual Apple, the shop, not the fruit, saw it and asked me if I'd perform in the Apple Store San Francisco. And obviously it went about as bad as you can imagine, right?
As performing in an Apple Store would go. Yeah.
As literally performing in an actual shop, right? And, the story is basically, I don't even need to embellish it that much. It is basically true that halfway through, when there's no context that you're doing stand-up comedy, I just look like an Apple Store employee that's fielding questions. So anyway, I told this story at this 10-minute spot, and, people were just bent over laughing. It was one of those things where, because I was telling it for the first time, I was really reliving it, and I thought, right, great. Sometimes this just happens, right? You could just write a routine. Anyway, I then take that exactly same routine. I tried to replicate it in the context of the hour show, and it was the only bit where the audience were absolutely not engaged. They didn't care at all. It's such an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? There's something about that first outing.
What works for some things, yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually a thing in the TV industry in Japan. If somebody's a comedian or like a geinin over here, if it's their job to be funny, then they're expected to be funny in rehearsal and then do something different and still be funny in the actual broadcast. You're not supposed to, if you say something funny in rehearsal, you're supposed to have something else queued up for on air. And they'll actually give you shit if you say something in rehearsal that's funny and then you do it again on air. They're like, oh, you didn't have anything else, huh? And it's like a common thing in the industry.
I remember the first time I ever went into the Love FM studio
Yeah.
to be part of their afternoon show. And I said, "Oh, what are you going to ask me?" And then the one of the two, well, you know which one. In fact, no, we've talked shit about him before. Smiley-san. I thought he was punking me because he went, "Oh, I'm going to ask you this, then I'm going to ask you this." But then when we went on air, he asked me two different questions.
It's exactly because of the phenomenon you described, where they do that because if you try to recreate the same effect that you had in rehearsal, it doesn't work. It's that live first time thing is part of what makes that energy, which contributes to the feeling that you get from that. And so you like even I never like mean to punk anybody, but I'll say like these are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about, and then when the on air portion starts, I'm a different person. Like my energy is different, my vibe is different, the way that I frame it. I don't go in and say like I'm going to make a bunch of weird jokes and throw you off your game, because the average person being interviewed like couldn't handle that.
Well, the average person being interviewed can't even handle an interview, from my experience.
Yeah.
People do just freeze up, don't they? It's very nerve-wracking. I wonder if our energy would be different if this went out live. Well, it's not. Let's should we dive into have we got a jingle for the news? Well, we'll just do it. Should we dive into the news? If this were live, then there'd be a sound engineer that's just put a jingle in. But let's assume that
we'd never afforded a sound engineer. We could never afford a sound engineer.
We can't even afford our podcast hosting. Anyway, right, let's cast our minds back to January 2022, the start of the year. Of course, the year that the Olympics happened. They didn't, but that's how foggy your memory is that you briefly believe me.
Oh, nice save. You're doing the whole all the years bleed into each other thing. I was just getting ready to accuse you of doing a Beijing Olympics all Asians look the same racist bit.
That's nice. No. Although, if we're talking about a racist bit, let's just jump straight into it. January 2022, January of this year, it's difficult to believe, but Japan's borders were still basically closed.
You know what? You know what's also good is I just looked through the list of news links that we have on our shared script, and the first one is Japan Times, and then none of the follow-up ones are Japan Times because neither of us have a paid subscription to Japan Times, and we both hit the paywall.
That's right. quite a top-heavy Japan Times.
Get it out of the way early.
Research. That is absolutely true. Haven't we hit this issue before that we've had Japan Times journalists on, and if you refresh the tab too many times, it starts. Although I should probably tell you this off air. Apparently, there's a way in which you can bypass it. A Japan Times insider has told me.
I recently found a way to bypass it anywhere, to bypass any paywall.
Oh,
there are sites that just archive the web. If you search like archive, yeah.
The technical reason for this is sites want Google to crawl them. So what they do is they'll put the content behind a paywall, but they'll submit their content to a Google crawler, and so it's that they grab. Yeah. What an absolute tangent! I mean, what we've done now, we've made a promise about Japan River Cruise news, not met that promise. Then we made a separate promise about covering actual Japan news, not met that promise, and we're talking about how paywalls work. Anyway,
it's kind of like not meeting promises is a part of our brand.
Hey, maybe that's our thing. Maybe we should just rebrand as being like toxic online guys. We have covered the story a number of times on the podcast. In fact, Japan border closures were, I think, some of our biggest episodes in 2020, with people going, well, people making the comparisons to when Japan closed its borders for decades and decades and decades and didn't trade. How Japan always wanted to do this, blah, 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 blah. And then a lot of people going, no, that's reductionist thinking. Japan isn't just, a country that wants to lock itself down. Turns out those people might have been right, because Japan basically kept its borders shut to legitimate visa holders for almost the longest of anyone. I mean, China opened up their borders to visa holders before Japan did. So January 2020, there was still, this is 2 years into COVID's launch. There were still hundreds of thousands of non-Japanese students who had been given their offers, often paid their tuition fees, often, made life plans, finished their degrees in their home country, whatever, and were just waiting for some edict to say that they were allowed to make good their visa. It's really, and don't forget, this is in the context of, I think January 2020, Japanese citizens could essentially come and go freely, couldn't they?
Yeah. Since before then, they could come and go pretty freely with minimal quarantine restrictions and testing restrictions. And I know we kind of wanted to do this month by month, but I mean, the thing that I found interesting when researching kind of like what was in the news in the different months of this year, there were some real clear trends. And it was just like story after story after story about border closures, border restrictions, COVID numbers, tourism, and getting ready to open for tourism. Then before that, getting ready to announce that they were going to open for tourism, and then getting ready to
Yes.
to announce that they were opening for tourism. And also the yen. So that was the last one, was like just this looking back over the progression of things getting worse and worse. You'd see an article like yen hits the all-time low since the 1960s or something like that, and I'd be like, oh yeah, it's so bad, and I'd pull it up and it was like the yen hits 126. It was like that was so much better. Just really clearly identified how worse it's gotten.
And you'd think that these two stories should be related. One of the positives of a weak currency is that it's supposed to attract tourists. Japan is on sale vis-a-vis the rest of the world. But Japan seems to have missed a trick. I don't know. I actually don't know what my opinion on this is. Do you think, at the time, you had a lot of people saying, well, this is going to be so damaging to Japan's soft power. You've got people who were planning to do their masters or PhDs in Japan, and then because they were messed around so much, they've lost money, they've lost career opportunities. They'll go somewhere else. They'll find another path. And so there's definitely not even definitely. Yeah, why not? Why not just be committal? That's what you're supposed to do online, isn't it? You're supposed to just you say the most extreme version of your view. There's definitely a generation of people who have been messed around by Japan. And certainly if I was 22 years old, I probably wouldn't have cared enough to wait 2 years to go and do my exchange program. I would have just gone, fine. I want to do the exchange. I don't necessarily want to do it in Japan, if another country's offering me, similar terms. So I do reckon there is a group of people, of kind of Japan fanatics, people that really cared about Japan that have stopped cared or feel a bit let down by Japan. But I think the general population of tourists, like I think about my friends who have got nothing to do with Japan that have been considering Japan for their holiday this year, either at the end of this year, 2022, or the start of next year. They're not really aware of quite how pernicious the border closures were. I'm not persuaded that this news has kind of seeped into the mainstream consciousness. What do you think?
I would agree that the treatment of foreigners by Japan in terms of entry restrictions and border closings, I would agree that has not affected your average run-of-the-mill tourist's desire to come to Japan. That said, I know tourism is still dismal. The numbers are still horrible. And that the economic impact of reduced tourism in Japan is having a huge effect on people's livelihoods and lives. And it's not just tourists coming in from overseas. I think people have not yet gotten back into the mindset of going out to do things in crowds, go to events, go to restaurants, to go out and spend money. I think there's a certain segment of the population that got used to staying home and hasn't yet resumed life normally. I remember when we had your friend Andy on from, what was it, Singapore?
Andy Curtin. Yeah, so he was based in Hong Kong, and now he was based in Shanghai, and then he got kicked out of there. Then he was based in Hong Kong, then he essentially got kicked out of there. Now he's in Australia, but yeah.
But he was talking about how as soon as the restrictions are lifted, everybody's going to run back to everything. And I think that hasn't happened in Japan. And I know restaurants are still struggling. The tourism industry is still struggling really hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's probably a bit more nuanced. I think someone like Andy, who is young, healthy, has lived a fairly global life. And Andy is he now works for Live Nation as a tour promoter for big name comedians. But at the time, he was running comedy clubs in Southeast Asia, so he was always quite mobile. He always had a fairly fluid perception of the world. So I think for someone like him, he was ready. He already had the elasticity to bounce back. But I think, you might be right. This is something which I think you have a much better feel of on the ground than I do. And I think that we have listeners all over the world. And I think, okay, I'll give one example. I noticed even within Europe, different European countries having a very different relationship with the mask. For example, wearing a mask on public transport.
Just to clarify, do you mean the 1994 Jim Carrey movie or The Mask?
Yes, that's exactly it. Allow me to tell you what I think Germans think about flubber.
Nice. Bringing back one of the earliest in-jokes. You have to do a deep dive into the archives for that one.
But yeah, I mean, even different European countries have a different relationship with the mask. And in some instances, I'd say in the UK, we've done it pretty badly. You can kind of be ridiculed for wearing a mask. Whereas other European countries, they maintained mask wearing on public transport. Like right now, they've even removed the requirement to wear masks in care homes in the UK, which seems like a good thing to do anyway during a flu season. But, we digress. The point is, I don't know enough about how kind of Japanese people are feeling. However, I did notice, perhaps you saw this too. Oh, no, you didn't because you're off Twitter for a bit. Rochelle Kopp, friend of the show, I like saying that, retweeted a survey, or rather the results of a survey that claims to be from CNBC, which said that 35% of Japanese people polled said they would never travel again, the highest out of 15 countries. So, under the UK, for example, the figure was 8%, India was 10%, Mexico 11%. The highest after Japan was South Korea, 15%. Now, Rochelle gave a very Rochelle take, which is, let's find some nuance here, which is not what we're looking for, Rochelle. But basically, Rochelle asked the question, well, how carefully was this question translated? And also noted that the poll was taken over the summer, where you still needed a negative PCR test to return to Japan. Remember, the PCR test being the more expensive and bothersome of the two.
And did they compare that at all to whether or not those Japanese people were the kind of people who traveled in the first place? Because Japan's also got a really, really high rate of people not going overseas at all. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that number was 30% pre-COVID.
Right, okay, yeah, sure. And this is now the reason. They've now got good reason.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I suppose the story in January was that there was still a bunch of students not able to get in. Now, Japan used to really care about the soft power it was generating from the students. I mean, we've talked on the show before about how the JET program, which is the program that allowed you to come to Japan for the first time, which is ostensibly a program about getting native English speakers to teach in Japanese schools. But what it's actually about is generating a whole bunch of soft power. I think it was an express aim of the program that past Jets would end up being thought leaders and politicians back in their home countries and would have some fondness for Japan. Likewise with the MEX program, which I was the beneficiary of, which is where the Japanese government just gives you a whole bunch of money to basically pursue any kind of academia. That again was there in the hope of fostering bilateral relations with other countries. But in terms of where Japan really makes its money, which is loads and loads and loads of tourists turning up en masse and spending an absolute shit ton of money, that might not have been affected now. I'm not sure.
You're saying that ideologically, is that right?
I think of a friend who messaged me during the summer this year, so it was about August, and they asked me for Japan travel tips. They didn't even know that the borders were previously closed. They just could see that they could book flights. They weren't even aware of the travel ban. Yeah. So,
yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying yes. In principle, I think the vast majority of travelers do not factor into They don't make their calculations based on what Japan's policy was and entry restrictions for visa holding foreigners or things like that. They don't even know about it. So yeah, it doesn't factor into whether or not they want to go here. But in terms of whether or not that, tourists showing up in huge numbers to bolster Japan's economy is happening right now, it's not.
Sure. There's probably other reasons for that.
So speaking of bringing foreigners over to Japan, should we go ahead and jump into our February 2022 story? February 2022 was when the Japan International Cooperation Agency released a study that projected that Japan will need 6.74 million foreign workers by 2040, which is 4 times more foreign workers than Japan currently has today. And this is, again, because of Japan's aging population, Japan's labor shortage. They will need 6.74 million foreign workers to support the workforce in the year 2040.
I mean, this is, I guess, another trend which we've covered on the show before, which is this necessary tension between Japan's population getting older and needier and Japan not producing enough babies to support the next generation in the pyramid scheme that we call society.
And since most of those foreign workers come from Southeast Asian nations, the study also noted that they expected Japan to have a lot of trouble attracting those foreign workers because other Southeast Asian nations are also dealing with their own declining populations and birth rate shortages and aging issues.
Yeah, and also I guess what's really interesting is as the value of the yen drops and as generally the quality of life in Japan gets comparatively lower compared to, in terms of parity, right? As other Southeast Asian nations develop and increase their quality of life, there's going to come a point where the carrot, for example, of a Filipino nurse or a Vietnamese factory worker, Japan just won't have the buying power anymore.
Yeah. So one thing that I found interesting in this article that talked about the study was it said that the study assumes, so this 6.74 million is a low estimate, and it's an estimate based on the assumption that Japan will make aggressive investments in labor-saving technologies. It says they're going to have to be at least as aggressive in those investments as they are towards foreign labor.
Oh, God. There's definitely a better choice of words there, isn't there?
No, that was my joke. But okay. I mean, if there's anything that Japan is good at, it's at being aggressive towards foreign laborers. Yeah,
I mean, for those that aren't in the loop, I think we covered this too. That there's essentially types of slavery that go on. It's ever so tragic, where people from, I think there are countries like Myanmar that was targeted, Nepal was targeted. The workers would come over, pay large recruitment fees, and then essentially live in prisons.
Really, really bad cases where Vietnamese workers took their own lives or felt pressured into abandoning babies they'd given birth to. There was one case where that happened, and there was a big case in the news where they had a worker from Southeast Asia who was being hazed, which was really just a euphemism for being tortured, was being physically abused at work.
Goodness me. Taking a step back, do you think the Japanese population has a sense of the kind of the ticking time bomb of this, lopsided population graph?
I don't think so. I think that there are some people who do. I think that the average person probably has no idea. And then I would say that, unfortunately, a lot of the people who are in positions of governmental power or policymaking positions are more conservative and still hold that sort of Nihonjin-ron leaning Japan exceptionalism philosophy, where they still see foreigners as polluting the local population and diluting Japanese culture. I don't know if you've been to I know you haven't, actually. I know you haven't been to any kind of ryokan or like an onsen hotel or any kind of tourist experience in Japan in a long time. But the tourism industries in Japan, even in local areas, you go out to a local onsen hotel in Kyushu, somewhere out in the countryside, and half of the hall staff is Southeast Asian workers. And You sit
Right.
in like the banquet hall where they serve you the kaiseki course ryori, where they come out and like they light a little burner and you can cook a little sukiyaki nabe on your table, and you've got sashimi courses and all of this stuff, and you've got non-Japanese people serving it and Japanese levels of mixed ability, and you can sit in those rooms and you can hear the tables of old people around you literally complaining about how it's not Japan anymore. You know, they've come here to enjoy
Right.
Japan, and it's not Japan anymore.
Yeah, they're absolutely right. I mean, these old people are right that Japan has changed and will continue to change. I think it's something that, I guess I always make parallels with the UK whenever we talk about these kind of really big problems with Japan. But the UK right now has a lot of hallmarks of kind of a failed state, right? We've been churning through prime ministers. We essentially have a general strike going on. The train drivers and nurses and a whole bunch of other people have decided not to work. We've got effective wage stagnation, or in many cases regression in the past 2 decades. We've ostracized ourselves from our closest political union, at least geographically. And the problem I think that Britain faces is we had, during the Blair years, which is 97 onwards, a period of real prosperity. And also Britain, regrettably, had an empire that a lot of people still think was a good thing, right? And I think Japan still kind of, the people that are operating the levers in Japan still remember Japan in the 80s, which was an unstoppable power, which had essentially growth that seemed like it could never stop. And, just taking a little zoom back, it's totally plausible to imagine Japan in 50 years' time being a significantly smaller player globally than it is now. This idea of Japan being one of the top GDPs in the world and having this big influence, just like the UK, I think is a presumption that is very, very, very easily overturned.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just want to do some quick fact checking before the listeners jump on us, before the Bryans get all up in arms. You cited the Blair years as 97 on. The first Blair Witch Project didn't come out until 1999.
It's a great way to justify not having listened to my point, but rather spend time on Google. Nice. But yeah, what's very interesting, actually, I remember having a disagreement with a university lecturer back in the day. And looking back, I guess I didn't have enough Japanese to really quite understand that. I think he was pretty right-wing. I don't think I quite realized it at the time. But he basically said, he was a very, very smart guy. Very, very smart, very considerate. Real globalist as well. He'd studied at Harvard, spent time in Europe. Really smart guy, really on it. And one of his strongest convictions was, I don't think Japan should grow anymore. I don't think Japan's population should get bigger. I don't think we should try and make our GDP bigger. I think we should embrace decline. And I always thought it was a really odd thing to say, but as the years have gone by, I'm starting to understand what he means, which is, if Japan wants to continue its levels of growth and prosperity and kind of, I guess, dominance globally, it has to basically fight an unwinnable war.
Yeah.
Because it has to make so many compromises that it ceases to be Japan. So, yeah, he was coming at this, I think, from a slightly nationalistic perspective, which is fair enough. That it's better for him that Japan looks inwards and becomes insular, because then it doesn't have to play the globalist game.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at March. So we've got a couple of options for the March story. One sad one, which was there was an earthquake, which I think eventually killed 4. That was the one in Fukushima, on the northeast coast of Japan. I think that was the only big earthquake this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'm in Kyushu, in Fukuoka Saga, in an area that doesn't get hit by earthquakes with the same frequency that other places do, and so I think I've only ever experienced like 1 or 2 tremors, and now that I'm not on Twitter and I don't see all the updates from people in Tokyo tweeting about earthquakes, I haven't thought about earthquakes either in a really long time, and I don't think there's been one that's made the news that I've noticed recently.
I was in Fukuoka when the terrible Kumamoto earthquake happened.
Yeah.
And I found it really scary because I didn't know what was going on when the whole building was shaking. I could have taken a wild guess. But it is a really unnerving thing to see books falling off your bookshelf.
Yeah, I remember. I also didn't feel that one. I didn't feel that one. I was in...
It was in the middle of the night.
Hiroshima at the time, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you were very, very fast asleep and you were in... you were not near the epicenter, you would have ignored it. But of course, if you were living in Kumamoto, it was incredibly destructive. This is probably a good time to retell the story of when I got a call from Anai-san, the Love FM producer.
Don't. You've told this story on the show 3 or 4 times. I thought you were going to do your kanji dictionary joke, which you haven't done on the show.
That's true.
Yeah.
I used to tell a joke in Japanese, which was yeah. You get it. So that's true. So when there's an earthquake or a natural disaster in Japan, no matter what phone you've got, even if you've bought it abroad, somehow the local government is able to put a pop-up notification on your screen. And if you don't read kanji very well, those notifications are scarier because you don't know what it means, right? So the notification might say there's an earthquake, and you don't know. So my system...
So it was a tsunami warning. You got a tsunami warning, right? And like you can sometimes read the kanji tsunami, like it's about a tsunami. Or sometimes it'll even like the headline will also include English, but then the content won't. So you see tsunami, but then you can't read what it says about the tsunami.
Yeah, that's right. And so it'd be really scary to have a whole paragraph of Japanese text and not know whether it means that you're about to die. So my tactic was I would sleep next to a kanji dictionary. So if I got woken up by one of these warnings, if the dictionary was wet, probably was a tsunami. That was the joke.
You're out of practice on it, but it's still funny.
Yeah, that was the least clean delivery. But go back to what we said earlier about that there's a time when a joke feels right. Having forgotten that I ever wrote the joke and then having to try and deliver it from memory. Obviously I completely butchered it.
Oh, your delivery was so you used to do like a whole act out thing. It's like wake up in the middle of the night, you get a notification on your phone, you see it says something about a tsunami, but you can't read it. What do? You crack open the kanji dictionary, and if the kanji dictionary is wet.
That's right. That is quite funny, actually. Maybe I'm good at comedy. So that's some news, but there was also a that wasn't the worst thing because there was a genuine missile threat. Do you remember North Korea threw a missile into the Sea of Japan?
I don't, because they've done it. They've done so many more missile launches since then.
Okay. This was supposed to be a fun rundown of the news. Was there anything nice in March?
Oh yeah, because they always it's always the nice stuff that makes the biggest headlines. No, wasn't anything nice in March.
Brilliant. April.
So April, I'm trying to remember if anything big happened in April outside of Japan. I think that was about the time, speaking of Russian aggression, that the whole thing kicked off, and there was lots of Japan news about Japan's response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Japan they officially came out and they condemned Russia. They called the Bucha massacre a war crime. We saw Russian diplomats leaving Japan. And then Kishi was offering Japanese support to the Ukraine in mostly humanitarian support, but also things like drones. And then we saw a huge ramp up in security talks with other Asian nations, trying to shore up security ties with the Philippines and Indonesia, citing mostly threats of Chinese incursion. But yeah, April was a big month for...
Japan is seen as an ally of Ukraine. I think that's an important starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, and we kind of made fun of the Japan offers to house Ukrainian refugees at the time for a number of reasons. One, we didn't think Ukrainian people would actually take Japan up on the offer, and two, Japan has been historically very, very bad at taking in refugees at all. So why all of a sudden were they willing to take in Ukrainian refugees? But I think Japan's had a relatively successful program of welcoming Ukrainian refugees.
Do you remember in when Crimea happened, which was, well, it must have been when I was in Japan. I think 2014. this is something I could have fact checked. But I remember at the time Japan was criticized because it participated in sanctions which had absolutely no bite, right? Because Japan wanted to maintain its relations with Russia, but I think
2002.
What?
Justin Timberlake, Crimea River, official video, 2002.
Oh, fuck. That's going to
be my running joke for this episode.
You actually got me there. I was like, maybe I did get it completely wrong. No, but the annexation of Crimea, a lot of the international community responded badly. The UK too, by the way. Let's be honest. We were the beneficiaries of lots of lovely
a lot of
Russian
the
money.
European community responded badly, specifically Crimea. They did not take it well.
Yeah,
they did not
were
like
very
it.
Unhappy. Not everyone. There was obviously some people there that welcomed it, and that, regrettably, is where the tension lay. Why are we getting in the weeds of something that we've got absolutely no clue about? Anyway,
because it's important to Japan River Cruise news, Ali.
That's true.
I mean, if you're wondering why I thought you were talking about the Crimea River song, it's because of the venue, Ali. Think about the venue.
The Crimea River. It's funny.
Why would you?
I think we did that joke, didn't we? The Crimea River.
I think you did a play on words thing. Yeah.
Anyway, yes, to absolutely great effect. Anyway, where we're at now is Japan is doing its dues and has publicly denounced Russia and basically gone along with the rest of the world.
It's going to be on the right side of history this time.
Yes, good on you, Japan. So, did Japan eventually take Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, lots. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exact numbers, but I know you see a lot about it on the news. Just the other day, I saw they were doing a Ukrainian Christmas celebration, which happens on like the 13th of December. They have a slightly different saint who brings around presents, and it was a very, very well-attended event, and they had lots of interviews with all the Ukrainian refugees who had come to participate in it. And I think I remember an interview with a Ukrainian boy who was talking about how great it was to be able to celebrate something of his own culture in Japan, and how he was looking forward to being back at home in the Ukraine to celebrate next year.
Well, that's a stupid thing for him to say.
Fair enough. But I think also it speaks to one of the issues that we raised with the idea of Japan welcoming Ukrainian refugees. I think most of the ones who have come have not picked Japan out of a hat, or have not come because it's the only option, but they've come because they already have some sort of connection to Japan, relatives who are living or working here.
Yeah.
And I think it's also germane to the point that we always bring up about how, for somebody from a country like the Ukraine, if you're thinking about permanently relocating, Japan's not high on the list in terms of, the comforts of home or something similar to home.
No, of course not. No, you definitely go to a country that you've got some tie to. I mean, right now we've got the quote unquote migration crisis, which it absolutely isn't, but a load of migrants coming on boats the old-fashioned way, not just turning up with a visa, then not bothering to leave, but doing what the Vikings did. Anyway, those people, obviously the reason they're coming to the UK is because they've got some kind of family ties.
Those people.
Yeah.
Those people.
Well, I was going to give them a nationality, but I thought even that's wrong because a lot of them aren't even from that country. Anyway,
that those people thing you just reminded me. I pulled the same trick on my mom the other day. She was telling me she'd heard an NPR interview about the new Pinocchio movie, and she was like, "I don't know,
right.
like
apparently it's awful."
I heard it's very good, but she was saying they did the interview with the director. He was a Mexican gentleman, and I was like, oh yeah, it's Guillermo del Toro. He's super, super famous. And my mom was like, oh well, I don't follow this stuff. You know more about these people than I do. And I was like, these people. And she got. Nice. I absolutely knew what she was talking about, but she got so genuinely flustered that I had accused her of being racist against Mexicans. It was really funny. So flustered that she probably actually is.
Very nice. I spent the last month in Paris.
Yeah.
Doing a bunch of shows and vibing if I can be perfectly honest with you. Loads of very, very young people from Ukraine ended up in Paris, again, because, they might have just studied French at high school and they have to make a choice, and that's where they head.
Well, that was the language thing, and the degree of similarity to your home country is a huge, huge factor. And I remember, I think in 2021, during the Tokyo Olympics, when there was that Belarusian sprinter who got into political trouble and was worried about having to return home, and Japan offered her asylum. And she was like very publicly like, no thanks. And again, it wasn't.
Thank you, man. Yeah. I'm good, thank you.
It was like I can get to Poland and I can speak a similar language to what they speak there, and the food is what I'm used to, and it's just like it's so different that if you're gonna relocate, it's not real high on the list. And that was one of the reasons why we kind of like poked fun at the idea of Japan being like. Especially because Saga Ken came out and made this huge announcement about, welcoming Ukrainian refugees. And it was like, okay, first things first, they're not going to come to Japan. And then if they come to Japan, they're not going to go to Saga.
It is odd, isn't it? How this particular crisis, I mean, I don't think it's odd, actually. I think there is probably an explanation, which is the Ukrainians are generally white. If you think about all the other humanitarian disasters that have happened in the past year, there is an odd group of people that have become weirdly obsessed with helping Ukrainians. If you go to any regional airport in the UK, there is still now a guy, retiree, with a trestle table with a Google translated sign saying "Welcome Ukrainians" and like a welcome pack. Like they're there as greeters.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this was a really valuable service when the majority of Ukrainians were migrating, and I'm sure arriving in a country and seeing your country's flag and seeing a helpful person would be wonderful. But I do think it's the same kind of vibes as the first friend that you make as an exchange student in Japan, which is the overkeen Japanese person at an international exchange party. Like the friends you first meet, the ones which are kind of too keen to become your friends, you realize normally have something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And like now it's got to the stage where like the airports obviously are still allowing these people to be there as greeters, despite the fact that there are no Ukrainians on these on these flights. And I do wonder what it must feel like to be Ukrainian, turning up to Bristol Airport and just seeing a guy with a trestle table, and what he has to offer is a packet of Walker's cheese and onion crisps and a warm bottle of mineral water, right? Which is kind of laid out on the trestle table, because that's there's no budget from anywhere to do this, right? This is their own money they're spending. And on the one hand, it's really sweet, but on the other hand, it's like you're doing this for you now. This is your hobby. Your hobby is to rock up to Bristol Airport every day and sit on a trestle table.
And that was the point of the show that will feature the most localized British cultural references. Not only in the chips, but I don't know what a trestle table is.
A trestle table, the kind of table you take to a car boot, like a table that you can fold up and put in the boot of your car.
Oh, okay, yeah. We call that something really, really weird in American English.
You call it the trunk.
We call it a folding table.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah. Well, Michael McIntyre has this routine, right? It's like we call it horse riding. What do Americans call it? Horseback riding.
Yeah.
You've got to specify where.
I've seen it, yeah. The trash bin, right? The garbage bin instead of just the bin.
Yeah, the sidewalk.
Or the eyeglasses instead of the glasses, yeah.
Yes. Well, now we've butchered his bit. Now Michael McIntyre will learn how I felt when I vaguely remembered a joke. So... Well, we've comprehensively covered Ukraine. Well done, Bobby. That's it now. That's now a matter of record. All sorted. But it's really wonderful. It's really interesting. I've met so many Ukrainians while I've been in Europe. Very interesting. The next story that we have for May, which we've kind of already covered, I kind of forgot that I put this one in because I've already spewed my thoughts, was that mad... Well... The most insane thing that Elon Musk did on Twitter so far that year, which was Musk tweeted about Japan out of nowhere. We don't know why he cared about Japan so much, saying, at the risk of state, this is in May, at the risk of stating the obvious, unless something changes to cause the birth rate to exceed the death rate, Japan will eventually cease to exist. This would be a great loss for the world. So I guess we've kind of covered a little bit this idea of
Who did we have?
Japan embracing its decline.
Yeah, but who did we have on as a guest who was talking about no, a country does not cease to exist? Was it Tom?
Baldanet.
No,
Possibly.
Tom Lafong.
I don't remember.
Tom, who wrote
I don't know.
Japan's Aging Peace. He talked about.
Right.
I think it was him talking about the idea that Japan doesn't cease to exist. A country doesn't cease to exist. It changes the way that the country works.
You know, on the Guardian article which covered this story, Tobias Harris, also a friend of the show, was quoted by saying, "What's the point of tweeting this?" Which is kind of an evergreen thing to say. But yeah, so Tobias Harris said, "What's the point of tweeting this? The anxiety surrounding Japan's demographic future is not that Japan will eventually cease to exist, but rather the profound social dislocations that are occurring as a result of the decline to a lower population level."
Yeah.
I mean, basically, that's his way of saying, like Japan's going to change.
Yeah.
I think we've covered this all the time, but there's been loads of attempts to stimulate. Maybe stimulate's the wrong word. To stimulate childbirth, to stimulate procreation. Well, you can talk about this, right? You've had kids in Japan and know that there's a lot of government handouts.
They're doing more to expand the money that they're giving to people who give birth, and also they have all of these horribly misguided social outreach programs that are geared towards getting young people more interested in romantic relationships, because the byproduct of romantic relationships is kids. And I even saw one the other day that it was like they have a TV show and a movie that's about becoming a child actor, and it's a fictional story about becoming a child actor. But I think a part of it, or an aspect of it, was there was something about a reality show where they were getting child actors to play as though they were on a dating reality show. And the idea was to get kids of that age interested in and ready for and practicing how to do romantic love. And then it's all in Japanese. It's like
how to do dating reality shows.
Yeah.
the next generation of influencers.
And they use phrases like danjo no aida no kakehiki, or like renai taiken or renai keiken, which is like experiences about love, or like danjo no kakehiki. How would you even phrase that in English? Whatever it is would be inappropriate when discussing kids. Yeah. And I don't know if you remember when we first started to bandy about ideas about Comedy Japan, back with like Ed Daggers and BJ Fox way back in the day. We were trying to do like a weekly joke about the Japanese news and have it like published in Tokyo Weekender or something like that, or Time Out Tokyo. And one of the first ones that we all submitted as a prototype was about the Japanese Ministry of Education had this really manipulated statistic that they were passing off in high schools about how the prime childbearing age for women decreased drastically after you turn 23. And it was all geared towards convincing high school aged girls that they only had until they were 23 to give birth. And we generated some pretty funny jokes. It was like, many of the high school students were shocked to hear this, but, the 34-year-old teacher burst into tears. Or like, the follow-up material was about the ideal romantic partner who happened to be a 40 to 50-year-old Ministry of Education official.
An odd reductive way of addressing it, because it's basically like, on the one hand it's saying to a small group of people, hurry up, but it's also saying to every woman aged 24 to, as you said, 35, give up, that's it now, you're done. Insane. Absolutely mad. Well, cool. All right, well, we are hurtling now towards the final month of this.
You don't want to offer up, don't want to take the opportunity to offer up any thoughts on Elon Musk while we're here?
Do you want to say anything about Musk?
No.
There we go. That's the right attitude. Okay, final thing then. June. So this is June, Bobby. What happened in June?
Two things on my radar in June. One was that it was finally, ostensibly, the month that Japan reopened up to foreign tourists after the 2-year entry restriction. However, in practice, their policies about who was allowed in, which areas were the risk areas, if you would be allowed in as individual tourists or if you had to be accompanied by a tour group or part of a tour group, were so restrictive and so interminable that effectively, I think what they only had like tourism numbers in the hundreds after reopening.
Right. Yeah, I think it's easy to forget this, but Japan briefly danced with this idea of kind of bringing in tourists as they always wanted to, which is only take them to certain places in a group. You know, don't leave that group. Don't bother us, basically. That was very short-lived, that policy, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think as soon as they reopened, one of the chaperone tour groups, they turned into a COVID cluster. But also, I don't know. It's like if it's the way that Japan wants tourists to come in and travel, or if it's more that it's the way that Japan travels. Like Japan.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
As a country, is still, I think, very, very reliant on travel agencies. And I remember somebody had some jokes about like the younger generations like not realizing that travel agencies existed, or like, you know, seeing like an HIS or JTB and going like, that's still around, not even knowing how to approach booking a vacation through a travel agency. But Japan uses them.
HIS as well, because it has those big ships, doesn't it? It does cruises for young people, and a lot of young people make money by sticking up the posters.
Yeah.
Something that you'll notice in Japan once I've now told you is
that's not HIS, is it?
Oh, maybe it's not HIS, but it's you know which ones I'm talking about, right?
You're talking about Peace Boat.
Cruise liner posters. Yeah, it's Peace Boat.
The posters everywhere is Peace Boat.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they just pay students like 1,000 yen a pop to put them up. And so students will just go and bother, you know, nightclubs and get them to put them in their toilets and things.
Everywhere. They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. Once you notice them, they are literally absolutely everywhere. Yeah. So we are talking about... something else interesting I found out is I was speaking to a friend... Right now I'm in Edinburgh.
You totally lost the thread. We were talking about how Japanese people travel, and then you got onto Peace Boat, and now you're onto billing, putting up flyers.
No, We're
bringing it back. Bringing it back.
Watch how. Look, we might be out the game, but you just watch. So you watch this smooth landing. I was speaking to a friend who works in the tourism industry here, and Japan is known, even more than China, to kind of have its own. I'm explaining this terribly, but basically, there are local tourist agencies here, right, that will like organize trips, and they will have local resellers. So, like, if you're Moroccan, and you want to go on a trip in Edinburgh, there'll be a Moroccan travel agent that will have a relationship with a local tour provider here in Edinburgh, and they will take a commission on that sale. Right? Japan still has a legacy of when Japan was sending loads of tourists, that they will be local Japanese operators, often, you know, based in London, that will handle everything. And they're the ones that come up with the tour, and they're the ones that handle the transport. And they might even have, you know, different chartered buses. You know, everything about it is still geared for the Japanese market.
Well, that's where that image of the Japanese tourist overseas comes from, where it's just, you know, they show up on a bus in a huge group and they get off and they take a picture and, you know, camera around the neck, and then they get back on the bus and then they go. And that is very much
sure.
I think my wife's generation is like their style. That whole like backpacker Japanese movement grew out of a rebellion against that kind of travel. But I think it's still the primary mode of travel here in Japan, even domestically. That's the way they travel domestically.
But I guess it's looking for a different thing out of travel, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the product is different, even if the experience is the same. So Japan basically never stuck with this. Now, if you enter as a tourist in Japan, you can more or less do as you please. Oh, if you've stuck with the podcast this long, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to be in Japan in May. Regrettably, only for a few days. I unfortunately have quite a lot of work either side of it. But Golden Week. Anyone doing anything then?
Everyone.
I'm going to be in Japan in Golden Week. Yeah, exactly. I think that's literally the worst time to put on a comedy show. So that's when I'm going to be doing it. More on that at some point. I'll tweet it out or put it on my mailing list or something. But I hope to see you in Tokyo or Fukuoka if you are there during Golden Week, the worst time to do anything. The other story from June
was the culmination of what happened with pro wrestler and reality TV star Kimura Hana, who died by suicide after facing severe cyberbullying.
Yep.
And it led to this campaign that resulted in June, Japan passing a bill to make online insults punishable by jail time.
Yeah, can you just expand a bit on that story for people that aren't aware of what happened?
She was a mixed race. Kimura Hana was a mixed race professional wrestler and was on the show Terrace House, the Netflix reality show. And she died by suicide in May 2020 after getting just a horrible, hateful chain of messages on social media.
Of abuse.
Yeah, of abuse. And a lot of it was based on her being mixed race. But people...
Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, the story's a bit more nuanced than that as well, isn't it? Because the producers of Terrace House, which is a huge... well, it's not really a reality show, is it? A kind of a semi-scripted show.
That's what reality shows are, though.
Sure. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But, the producers kind of fell short of their duty. I think they've been sued. Have they already been sued or are being sued?
There were some people who were sued and prosecuted, and there were two men in particular I know who were fined the equivalent of about $80 and those results were considered like such light penalties that it kind of further fueled the campaign to change the laws to make more severe penalties for insults, which in Japanese law is different from defamation.
Yes, because defamation is about lowering your standing to other people, whereas these laws are about people looking to harm you, basically.
Insults, I think they define it by saying that they're publicly demeaning someone without referring to a specific action, whether it's like something that could be refutable or irrefutable. Like defamation is saying so and so did this. And that being false.
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly it. That's the important part of defamation, that it has to be untrue, and it also defamation has to lower your standing amongst your peers or amongst your network, right? That's what's actionable about defamation. Whereas what Japan's trying to do is to basically say if you're throwing insults at somebody, even if they're true, even if you're saying Bobby Judo's a nasty piece of work, right?
Yep.
If I say enough and it causes you harm, then I should be in trouble.
I feel like it also has to do with the intention, and the scope or the scale.
These kind of laws, right, against what this word insult means. That will also probably be down to judicial discretion.
Yeah.
Too. I don't believe that's been defined in the
and also
in the statute.
They want to make sure that it doesn't overly restrict freedom of speech, and so they are going to have some sort of oversight committee analyze it and the results of it within after it's been in place for 3 years to determine whether or not it restricts free speech. So
they should just ask Musk to do a Twitter poll each time.
Yeah, Twitter poll it. But I mean, they've committed to doing it in 3 years, so we will cover the results of that on our next episode.
It's a funny thing to say. there will come a point when people start to resent it. But certainly my experience, I'm sure you've had similar messages. I've had nice messages from listeners, or should I say former listeners, it's hard to know, saying how much they appreciate the old content and how much they're looking forwards to moments like this where we finally drop an episode. So thank you very much for sticking around. We do. I mean, it would be absolutely hilarious if we didn't bother with the second half, but we will. Brian Box remains open. So if you want to drop us an email with any abuse or insult, as long as it stays within the law, Remember we told you about the law
Within
now.
the law.
Feel free to do so. JapanByRiverCruise.com. There is a little box where you can click fax us, which is funny because it's a reference to Japan still using fax machines. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. This would be the point where we generally ask you for donations, but now we're going to ask you to not donate any money because doing so makes us feel obligated and we resent it. But we love you.
Makes us feel bad.
We're glad that you listen, and we look forward to doing the second half and hope to see more of you next year.